What do Seamus Heaney, Paul Amin, William Butler Yeats, and Elena Quillinan all have in common? Poets, Irish poets prescribed for study in 2024, examination 2024. Irish poets prescribed for examination 2024 who deal with deeply personal issues. Irish poets prescribed for study in 2024 whose poetry also addresses social or political issues. Final thing they have in common, I think two of them are going to be on your leaving cert. You know, you'll have people filling you full of shit, telling you which two. Oh, it won't be me and because she was on last year, or it'll definitely be whoever, X and Y. Talking through their rear ends. You need to have 4 ready. Don't lie to yourself. So, Heaney is one of those 4. And as you know, I'm just trying to build up a kind of a file of Heaney videos here. So this is the Tollund Man. It is a poem written by Seamus Heaney, not about Seamus Heaney's life, but about the world that Seamus Heaney inhabits. But it's about more than that. One of the buzzwords I would always say to remember about Heaney is the word philosophical. Nick Quillinan is very similar actually in terms of that. Two extremely thoughtful poets whose observations go far beyond their own life. They're writing about, they're making observations about what it is to be human. That's the Tollund Man in the photograph. It's a bog body. He's a individual who lived sometime around 2,000 years ago and who was sacrificed in a religious ritual in Tollund, which is in Jutland in Denmark. Heaney was drawn to this idea of the bog bodies for many reasons, not least of which is the fact that where he's from in Ireland, in the part of Derry that he's from, there are peat bogs, and there have been, numerous bog bodies uncovered in Ireland, and actually up the road from where Seamus Heaney's family home is in Mossbawn, there was one found. Today is the 3rd of February. There was one found at the end of January 2024. So there's a personal connection, but this isn't about that. This is a poem about the Troubles. It's a poem about, and he never mentions the Troubles once in it. It's a poem about violence and where it comes from. And it's a poem about history. And in a year when we look around the world and we can just see on every single level, humanity repeating the mistakes of the past, it's a very timely poem for people to study. Love the opening line. Someday I will go to Ardhus. Those of you in my class when I've done this poem will know that always triggers my in the middle of Ard Street. Anyway, I'm sure maybe one or two of you might smile at that little joke, but it's not very funny. So Aarhus is the place in Denmark where the body is displayed. And he says he wants to go there, like a pilgrimage, to see his peat brown head, the mild pods of his eyelids, his pointed skin cap. And it is an extraordinarily interesting opening sequence. It is a quatrain. In fact, all the stanzas in the poem are 4-line stanzas. It is written in very, very simple language. Someday I will go to Aarhus to see his peat brown head, the mild pods of his eyelids, his pointed skin cap. It's kind of metronomic. It just beats along. It's natural. There's no particular meter being employed. The alliteration of the P's, the peat, the pods, and the pointed certainly help. There's a little bit of sibilance with see, his, pods, lids, skin. his again. But it's just a beautifully fluent piece of writing. So, and it's typically for Heaney, it's a pen portrait. In The Harvest Bow, there's a pen portrait, a little, description of his dad. In Mossbawn Sunlight, there's that famous description of his Aunt Mary. In The Underground, this beautiful description of his wife Maura. But here we have this very, very vivid description. Clearly he's seen the picture and he's looking at the man and he says, I want to go and see him in real life. So obviously the Tollund Man is of importance to him. And then he goes on the second stanza, in the flat country nearby where they dug him out, that monosyllabic language being continued, his last gruel of winter seeds caked in his stomach. Now that's brilliantly Heaney. Attention to detail. These bodies, as you know, when they're put into the bogs, they were preserved by the chemical, don't ask me the science of it, but the chemical makeup of the bog and the water meant that the normal process of decomposition didn't take place. So the body is preserved. It doesn't break down the way it normally would. So they were able to, when they opened up the body, when they took the body out and they examined it, they were able to even see what it had for breakfast. It had this like kind of porridgey type soup for breakfast. But doesn't that humanize him? He's a figure, he's an artifact really now, isn't it? But Heaney sees the human being in him, thinking about what his last meal was. Naked except for the cap, noose and girdle. The vulnerable idea of, he's naked. He's exposed. And then you have the image of the cap. You can see it was this kind of ritual sacrifice, and he had the cap put on his head, and there's the noose around his neck, and there's the girdle around his belt. So the belt is like a girdle, or the girdle is like a belt. So he was strangled, ritually strangled, and then thrown into the bog. And then he says, I will stand a long time. Now, I'm marking some of these in different colours, and as you know, I tend to go, okay, if it's yellow, learn it. And if it's blue, it's important. Now, again, that's up to you. It's up to you to learn whichever quote you want to learn. But this I will stand a long time is really, really, really important. Sorry, that thing is annoying me. It's really, really, really important, I will stand a long time. Because it just captures that idea that he wants to go there and think that this is like a pilgrimage. It's a place where you go because there's something really important there. Like in the old days where you thought if you were religious and you thought there were the remains of a saint, and you went to that place, Santiago, Jerusalem, you went to that place because the body of somebody really important is buried there. So why go to Aarhus to see this body? What's so important about it? We don't know yet, but Heaney's quiet, kind of thoughtful, descriptive intensity in these opening three stanzas just kind of makes us curious, draws us in. He calls the man bridegroom to the goddess. And then we have this quite vivid, typically for Heaney, he's so gentle, but he's capable of being quite vivid or even visceral in his descriptions of suffering. She tightened her torque on him and opened her fen, those dark juices working him to a saint's kept body. You could think that's hard. It's not hard. A torque is another word for like a rope, often metallic, that was used to strangle him. So when we read those lines, we can hear him, the breath being pushed out of him as he's being strangled. A fen is another word for a bog. So the bog opened. Excuse me, it's early. And his body was thrown in, and then the dark juices started to work, and he never decomposed in the way, the bodies of saints, secular or religious, for example, Lenin, or Saint Valentine, if it really is him. But those relics are kept so they don't decompose. Okay, so that's the opening sequence. It's really interesting, thoughtful, engaging, storytelling, poetry. Then we have to get to ourselves, why is he writing about this? And he writes about this because he regards the bog body as a trove. And a trove is a treasure. Trove of the turf cutter's honeycombed workings, now his stained face reposes in Aarhus. And a trove and a treasure, those are things of great value. So we have to figure out what is so valuable about this body, besides, of course, it being a really important historical artifact. It is that, but to Heaney, why is it so important? I love, by the way, the turf cutter's honeycombed workings. It's very visual. It's like a drone shot of the scene where the bogs are cut out, you know. Okay. Then we get into part 2 of the poem, which has the most difficult stanza in the poem. I could risk blasphemy, consecrate the cauldron bog, our holy ground, and pray him to make germinate. Now there's a enjambment into this next stanza here, but I'm just going to stop there for a second, because that's exactly the kind of line that makes people hate the stanza, that makes people hate poetry. It's hard. I was your age and I was sitting reading that. I said, what the fuck? The language is difficult. Here's what he's saying. He's a Catholic. So to pray to a pagan god is blasphemy. But he'd so desperately like that man not to have died the way he died, that he'd nearly risk his soul and pray to the pagan gods that he would be alive again. Germinate is to bring life. Why? And the answer comes not directly but indirectly, not explicitly but implicitly. When Heaney then takes us, as he does often, remember there are certain characteristics in Heaney's poetry we see a lot. For example, I don't know why that makes me sad. The compound word adjectives. But another thing is time shifts. And he takes us all the way from Iron Age Denmark, so 2,000 years ago, through time to the 1920s. And not in Denmark, but in Ireland. And he describes a sectarian murder in Ulster, where he's from, during the period of conflict, the War of Independence and post-War of Independence in Ulster, when a terrible crime was carried out, and 4 young brothers were tied to the back of a train, and the train was driven off, and they were dismembered. It's hard to find the right word. They were killed, and their bodies were broken and torn and ripped and scattered. And he brings up this image. It's the most striking image in the poem. It's vivid, powerful, impactful, direct language. It's exactly why Heaney, is on your leaving cert, because it's challenging to read, challenging both in terms of how troubling the image is, but also in terms of why he's writing it. The scattered, ambushed flesh of labourers, stockinged corpses laid out in the farmyards, telltale skin and teeth flecking the sleepers of 4 young brothers, trailed for miles along the lines. Now the word visceral, it's there, that word visceral. That word means vivid but troubling, ugly. Not ugly in terms of, ugly is the wrong word, disturbing. So the language is beautiful in terms of the power of the language and his ability to paint pictures with words and shock us. Like, we don't expect flesh to be described as scattered. We don't, this image of stockinged corpses, somehow just mentioning the fact that they're stockinged humanizes them. Like the idea of looking at train tracks and seeing human skin and teeth flecking or scattered across the train tracks, it's really, really, really troubling and unsettling and disturbing. And Heaney wants it to be. He's forcing us to look at this terrible act of violence. He doesn't talk about whether people who were doing the killing were Catholics or Protestants, or whether the people being killed were Catholics or Protestants. Because to Heaney, in the overall point of things, of course to those men and their families, that matters. But to Heaney, the overall point of things, that doesn't matter. What matters is this. Now get this in your head. I could have done this, and I might do a short on this poem, because I could do this in like 30 seconds. Here's what he's saying. 2,000 years ago, that man in the bog was sacrificed because the people who did it believed that the sacrifice was going to make their community safer. They believed that the gods rewarded human sacrifice by granting a harvest, by ensuring that, I hope that light doesn't go off now, by ensuring that there would be good weather. They believed that. Now, we've gone beyond that. Like we're not ignorant like that anymore. We don't believe that there are gods who will, reward the killing of another human being in order to, and allow us to have a more peaceful life. We don't believe that anymore. And yet what Heaney's saying is, there's a direct line between the idea that you could make the world a better place by killing the Tollund Man to appease the pagan gods, to the idea that you can make the world a better place by killing these four brothers, because then they're no longer dangerous to your community, whatever your community is. And of course, the point he's making is brilliant, and why the fuck can people not learn this lesson? Killing other human beings does not make the world a safer place. It doesn't. It didn't make any sense. It was ignorant to murder that Tollund man, take his life in that ritual way, the same way as it was ignorant to murder those four young brothers. As Heaney writes this poem in the 1970s, there are people in Northern Ireland who are blowing each other to shit. And Heaney's despairing. And again, he's not criticising either side. He's not. And he never did. He understood the complexity and the deep-seated feelings on both sides. But he's getting into the philosophical idea of what good does it do? And it doesn't do any good. The last stanza is lovely. He brings us back to Tollund Man and his last moments. And he uses this gorgeous oxymoron. Something of his sad freedom as he rode the tumbril should come to me if he goes there. A tumbril is like a cart that would have been brought along from wherever he was being held to the bog. I love sad freedom. It's a really unusual adjective-noun combination. Freedom. When we think of freedom, we think of happiness, we think of joy, we think of release, we think of positivity. We don't usually think of sadness, but of course, the man's misery is going to end. His life is going to be taken, so his suffering is going to end. There's freedom, but that's also sadness. Heaney always is trying to find the human. He's trying to, to make the reader think about the humanity in our experiences. And he says these names, Tollund, Graball, Nebelgar, these are all places where these bodies have been found. So in other words, the practice was widespread. Watching the pointed hands of country people not knowing their tongue. And I think that's another really interesting point he's making that just sings out to me 50 years after this poem was written. And I live in Dublin now, and I love Dublin, and I love everything about Dublin. One of the things I love about Dublin is the fact that it's a city where there are many, many, many people from many different parts of the world. And it's scary how problems you can point at people because they're different and blame a society's problems on them. It's an age-old out for people instead of facing into what the real cause of problems are. And Heaney again is pointing at that. Oh, you're the problem because you're different. So this man would have been a prisoner, probably taken in a raid or in a battle. So he gets sacrificed. And if you sacrifice him, the different guy, well then your society is safer. That was the idea. And that's what makes Heaney sad. Out here in Jutland, in the old man-killing parishes. Man-killing parishes is brilliant, isn't it? It's kind of witty. He's like making a kind of a dark joke. You know, a parish is it's a part of the structure of the church, the Christian church, the Catholic church, you know, what it was supposed to preach, to take away this ignorance of paganism, you know, brotherhood or humanity, I suppose, forgiveness, turn the other cheek, man-killing parishes. Very, very clever. And he says, if I go out there, I'll feel lost. And when he says lost, he means like spiritually, emotionally lost, upset, unhappy, but also at home. Because here he is, he's living in Northern Ireland in the 1970s, and people are still killing each other, thinking they're making the world a better place for their community. And if he goes out to Tollund, to Aarhus, and he stands in front of that body, he's going to feel at home, because 2,000 years have passed and nothing has changed. 50 years have passed since this poem was written. I hope your generation are going to be the generation that will recognise that change needs to happen. Killing people, hating people, blaming people. Pointless, doesn't work.